Hello, Power BI people. I wanted to do something today about data slices, which, data slices are a very common thing to use in reports, but there are one or two things with data slicing that I don't particularly enjoy. I don't think perhaps work all that well within reports. And some are quite standard. So if we look at, for example, what we have on our screen right here, what we have is basically a very standard data set. It doesn't matter what the data is. In this case, it's pedestrians on certain streets, whatever. And we have a date range. So what comes up quite often is, how do we set as standard the past n days when we open a report? For example, I open my report and I want to ensure that I see by default the previous 7 days data. So no more, I don't have to open it and then set my date range. It's just set as the previous 7 days. Now, of course, there are ways of doing this with this very standard slicer, but I'm not a particularly big fan of this slicer and how it works. But let's have a quick look at what I'm talking about. So what we have here is a very standard data slicer, correct? This is the between, and it allows the user to drag whatever date range they want. So here, my date range starts at the 25th of the 6th in 2020, and it ends yesterday, 27th of the 1st, 2021. Cool. So with this slicer, it's nice and user-friendly. You can just slice through, and it shows you everything you're looking at. Brilliant. What you can't do with the slicer, though, is basically define, show me only the previous 7 days data. The date range that you set in it is somewhat static. So, for example, here when I say the 28th, this will always remain the 28th. So if I save it at this point, it's not going to update automatically as my date range increases. Yeah? So whilst it's nice and easy to use, it's not particularly dynamic in the fact that you can't set it to a standard, which is what we're looking at. If you look at the different types of slices we have for date, it's not really possible with any of them. Certainly if you look at list and of course of drop down, because then you're just selecting one date. Before and after is the same thing. The only time we can't really do that is if we look at the relative date filter. Oh, which is horrible. I'll just change the color there so you can see it. That's better. Cool. So here, obviously you can, because we have the option to say the last, next, or this. So if we say show me everything in the last 7, and then we go days, we're going to have exactly that. We're going to have the last 7 days of data, which is fantastic. And also this is dynamic, so when the report updates, it's always going to be the last 7 days of data, which somewhat satisfies what we want to achieve. However, what you gain in functionality, you also lose in functionality. So with this slicer, you can't say, okay, I've seen the last 7 days, but I want to see everything from 3 days ago until 10 days ago. The anchor in this slicer is always the most recent date. So in my case, the 27th of the 1st. So 27, and then you have the 7 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 days from the most recent date. I also have issues with the slicer in the fact that I don't find it particularly user-friendly. I don't like the option of having to click here to the next and then say, okay, show me 2. Obviously, it's going to be blank now. I have no future date. The next 2 days or the next 2 weeks. I don't like that. I don't know. That's a personal preference, but I don't think it works particularly well. Yeah. So how do we get around that? What can we do to create something that's more dynamic and that is dynamic, but also is going to allow our user to play around with the data a bit more? So it's quite a simple solution. We can jump straight to that now. It involves doing some changes within the query editor. And when we do that, we'll see what it adds to the report. So we go to report, we go to, of course, edit query. And all we're going to do is going to add one column. And to add this column, you don't, as I say, it's like a no-code solution. So I have a very basic date table here. It's just basically the dates. That's it. So ordinarily, you'd have more data than this. And we can add to this now. And how you do that is quite simple. We're going to select our date column. And then we're going to go to add a column. And then column from examples, and then from selection, because we're selected. I mean, in this case, it doesn't make any difference because we only have one column, but normally you wouldn't. So we go from selection, and then we have this blank column. What we're going to do here is double click, and it presents us a number of options of what we can extract from our date column. And we're just going to double click on age from date. And then hit return. And then of course it auto fills down. And the number in that column is the number of days from, as you can see here, our datetime local now minus that date. So it's 23 days between today and that date. We go OK. One last thing I'll do, I'll just change this type from duration, as you can see here, and I'm going to change it into a whole number. So you can of course actually change it in here as well, but just keep it nice and straightforward. We're just going to change it to a whole number, which makes it easier to use in the next step. Once you've done that, that's all you need to do. Yeah, there's nothing more to it. If you want to see the code itself, you can just double click here. And this is actually what I like about this functionality, is you can add something without knowing the code and then actually read the code. And you can see it's very, very simple. Date from, datetime local now, minus the date is our age. Cool. What we want to do, we want to use that. And we'll go home, we go close and apply. That's it. So as I said, very quick solution. And then we'll find when the data is loaded, we're going to have an extra column within our date table, because currently we only have date. And we can put that new column into a slicer, and we'll see how that works. So I will just now click on our age, which of course presents standard in a bar chart, but we want that as a slicer, and we click on slicer. And again, I'll change these horrible colors so you can see what we're looking at here. Brilliant. And the slicer header too. My lord. Sort this out. Exactly. So what we have here is age. So we have that the smallest is 1, which is going to be yesterday. If this data set included data from today, then today would be a 0, because that's his age, and the age of the age of today is of course 0. If we have future dates, that would be -1, -2. So this also works with if you have dates in the future, whatever, forecasting or whatever you're using. Yeah. So for me, the beauty of this is pretty straightforward. If we want to set a standard in our report, we can basically set it to that. So this is going to show us the last 7 days data. So we've achieved that. And of course, this is dynamic. Yeah. So when we update this report, the 1 and the 7 are always going to remain the same. So as more information comes in, we're not anchored to one date, we're anchored to a range from those dates, which is exactly what we want. And what I like about this is one of the key points for me, is that we can then allow the user to say, okay, but I don't want to see, I've looked at this now, I've evaluated that, I want to see, okay, I want to see a few days ago. That's obviously more than a few, it's 60 days, 72. I want to see a different date range, and you can just slide through that this way. And also, and this is what this one can't do, this standard relevant date filter, you can't then pull that and say, okay, now I want to see that date range. I like this solution. Of course, it's not something that's going to work in every single report. Completely depends on the date range that you're using, but it for me, it comes in very handy very often when you have users who want to really define the date range themselves. Yeah, and again, it's very helpful to allow us to define a standard date range when we open our reports. Yeah, so there's not much more to it than that, to be honest. One benefit, or another benefit for me that it has, is that when you actually use this slicer, it's easier to make it certain sizes. Yeah, so this might seem like a small thing, but I'm sure you see when you create dashboards, reports, whatever you choose to call them, reports. Sometimes you kind of want to make sure everything in your reports are aligned like slices, and I find it harder with the slicer because it has to be quite wide, in my experience. So if you kind of start to make this a bit smaller, from here, you're kind of losing information because you can't see the last anymore. And you can make the font smaller, but I don't like that as a solution, because if you make the fonts too small, it's harder to see. And yeah, so here it has to be, for me, it's quite a big slicer, and I refuse to admit that as a trivial issue, because I actually think it's quite important. Whereas this one, yes, I understand the slicer here is then harder to use because obviously you have this huge date range and you only got a little slicer, but still it's quite easy to use. It's a really user-friendly thing, I think. So I think the benefits of this one are great, and it's really easy to implement. Like I say, it's one column, and you're done. You're sorted. Yeah. So for this video on date slicing, that's what I want to look at. I do plan on doing another related video very soon, hopefully actually today, tomorrow. And we can, so if you watch this one, then you can jump straight to the next video, because that also deals with creating flags within your date range. I don't want to combine those two videos together because I don't really like very long videos. So yeah, if you want to keep watching anything about date ranges and slices and different things to do with the date table that makes the job a little bit easier, you can set up very defined date ranges for your users, then also take a look at the next video. Yeah, but for this one, I hope it helped. I hope there's some information that you can think, okay, that could be helpful. You might think I'm completely wrong, which is fine. If you do, then please feel free to let me know. I'm always open to constructive criticism, or just general criticism. This is fine too. And let me know how you found it. Okay, so thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this, and yeah, have a pleasant rest of your day, whatever time it may be. Thank you very much. Goodbye.